What is going on, everybody? Welcome in to my next positional rankings video for the 2025 NFL Draft. Today, we are talking cornerbacks, and this is a really fascinating draft class for a couple of reasons. Number one, I do think all of the players we're going to cover here today are in consideration, at least on day two, and are potential starters in the league, but the depth of this class falls off very quickly. We might see some reaches in this draft because of that. Teams looking down the board a little bit, saying we gotta, pump these guys up around to make sure we can get some actual options to contribute to our football team out of this draft class. So, especially as you look down the board into the teens of this draft, it's a thin cornerback class. And if you want my opinions on who some of those, day three options might be, I have written up 20 corners on my Patreon draft guide as of this recording, if you do want to check out my thoughts on anybody we don't talk about here today. But beyond that, it's especially interesting because really 3 of the top 5 guys in this draft have some pretty major injury stuff to clear at the next level. And then you've got the whole Travis Hunter conversation as well. So there's a lot of kind of polarizing conversations at the top of the draft that I think polarizing is the right word there, right? There's a ton of potential at the top of this draft, but there's also kind of potential to be underwhelmed by some of these top selections too. So we've got a lot to break down here today. Very much looking forward to it. If you could please hit that like button as we get started, it really does help me out. And make sure you're subscribed. We are going to be doing safeties for our next positional rankings. You're not going to want to miss that within the week. And then the goal is to get offensive line and linebackers done as well to round out this entire class. But with that, let's go ahead and get started. This is a top 10 video, but we do actually have 11 players to talk about because, as you guys have seen, if you've been following these positional rankings videos, we do have some ties to kind of indicate tier splits, and if one prospect graded out the same as another, I am including them together here. And that's what we're doing with my number 11/10B corner. And we're starting this one off with a bang, with a player that I am unfortunately a lot lower on than consensus, on Azareye'h Thomas out of Florida State, where, the consensus rankings, if you will, kind of have them top 50 or so, even into some first round mock drafts. And look, here's the deal. I love the tape. I generally like corners in this play style, which for him, he is a bump and run press man corner who is physical as all hell, technically sound. I'm going to talk about the stuff he does well and get into that in a minute. I love the tape. I do. And I totally understand if you love him, if you are betting on the tape and his technique and his length and his size, that he's going to make it at the next level. But the lack of speed that he has, specifically in his profile, his scheme fit as a press man corner, terrifies the living daylights out of me, and I don't know if it can work at the next level. And I think it's one thing to watch the tape and love the player and want to bet on him. And again, I understand that. But I also think it's important to be realistic and take a look at the current NFL and the last 5 to 7 years in the NFL and ask, is there any example of a press man corner with 4.6 speed working in the league? And I crowdsourced this. I went to Twitter and asked, who are some of the corners that have overcome a 4.58/4.60 40? There's mixed reports on what he ran. I think the kind of official listing is 4.60. I've seen it at 4.58, but that's kind of the best case. And by the way, I think the lack of speed shows on tape. I'm going to talk about some of that in a minute here, but it was not a huge surprise to me that he ran slow. So I think it checks out. But I was like, even down to like a 4.54. Who are the guys? Who's the last guy that kind of had success in this mold? And you got kind of two different branches of answers with this. Number one was a lot of these kind of off-zone style corners. The number one guy people pointed to was last year, Kamari Lassiter. Ran like a 4.58, 4.59, so right in that range. But the thing with Lassiter was he was an off-zone corner at Georgia with a lot of slot potential as well, but someone that with oily hips and great agility testing scores and great tape as an off-zone corner, you could at least project him into that role. That's how Houston used him. And obviously in an off-zone role, you're playing 10 yards off the ball. A lot of the times you're going to protect that lack of deep speed and the ability for faster receivers to stack you over the top. So yeah, you're going to have some examples of off-zone corners running slower and having success in the league. Casey Hayward was a name people threw at me. He lived in off-zone cover 3 and a little bit of cover 4 throughout his career. Rasul Douglas is a player that has been pointed out. Rasul Douglas is actually the pro comp I'm going with, and I'm going to get to that, why that's my pro comp later on. But a snapshot of that is Rasul Douglas couldn't play press man, and he sucked for years. Eventually kind of developed and found a home with Joe Barry's Packers and the Bills, where he played off zone cover 4, cover 3 type of stuff, right? So that's one path for slower corners to have success, but that's not Azareye'h Thomas. He's a press man, bump and run corner. Okay, the other avenue of slower corners, you got to wind back the clock about 8-9 years to those Seattle 3 systems where you're playing press cover 3, living in that world. It was just a different age. There are no longer true press cover 3 systems in the league, especially with Gus Bradley gone. But even Gus Bradley had to adjust to more of an off-zone cover 3 because that's just the world that the NFL lives in nowadays. So the Richard Sherman, Brandon Browner, Byron Maxwell, these guys were all slower, bigger corners that pressed a bunch, but that system doesn't really exist for a guy like Azareye'h Thomas to thrive in anymore. And after that, you really start to run pretty short on examples of guys in his profile that are having success in the NFL today or within the last 5 to 7 years. The best case scenario, the one outlier example is Josh Norman, who was just a brilliant, brilliant football player that shattered expectations with a 4.6 type of 40 because of elite zone IQ, elite ability to study the tape, anticipate routes. Yeah, obviously you'd love Azareye'h Thomas to be that type of outlier, but betting on that is damn near impossible. That's where you get yourself in trouble as a drafter, betting on outliers like Josh Norman. Honestly, the closest physical examples of players like Azareye'h Thomas in the league today with 4.6 speed that I could think of, Levi Wallace and Mike Jackson, kind of fringe replacement level starters. Take them or leave them types, certainly not guys that you're taking top 50 in the draft, second round, right? And those are the closest physical comps for someone like Azareye'h Thomas. So I know I'm spending a lot of time throwing out pro comps and other players and not even talking necessarily about the film on Azareye'h Thomas, but I am a believer that 40 time and speed matters at this position specifically more than any other position. For those that have followed along these position rankings, I've taken some gambles on physical outlier types. I love Harold Fannin at tight end. I love Bo Scatabo at running back. It's not that I'm all about speed and testing and physical traits and all that stuff, but I do think at this position it really matters, and especially at this position for a guy whose skill set is press man, bump and run coverage. And the reality is, if you're taking him and asking him to do what he does well, which is press man, In the NFL, look, teams are only going to run cover 2 man 2 to 3% of the time. It's a lot. When I say that number, a lot of people are surprised. Cover 2 man is kind of a prevent defense in the NFL. We've seen a little bit more of it in recent seasons, but this isn't Madden where you can run cover 2 man and live in that. That's just not what teams do in real life. So if you're going to run man coverage with Azareye'h Thomas, it's cover 1, and he's going to be on an island on the outside without safety help over the top. Sure, you could just consistently shade your safety to that side of the field and protect over the top of him. Am I taking a player that you have to protect in that way in the top 50 of the draft? No, I'm not personally. So if you're going to run cover 1 with him without safety help over the top, look, I get he was productive and really good at Florida State. Getting through his tape, again, I did see some of the lack of speed. I wasn't stunned by the 4.6 40. I think there was a lot of plays where I was finding myself asking, why are opposing offenses not testing him over the top? If they're going to try to run cover 1, press man, and maybe teams didn't know that he was super slow because he's still young, he's 20 years old, right? Now the book is out, right? That 40 time is on paper. Teams will see him on the field in the NFL and say, press man corner with 4.6 speed? Okay, try to cover Hollywood Brown on a go ball. Try and cover Jalen Waddle on a go ball. So many teams have those deep threats in the league, and they have coordinators that can isolate you, and they have quarterbacks that can throw the deep ball, unlike the college games. So I think, obviously, NFL teams are going to be so much more capable of forcing Azareye'h Thomas to protect the go ball, and I seriously have questions that he can do that. I do. It reminds me so much of the Vikings last year with 34-year-old Stephon Gilmore. They found out very quickly, dang it, we can't run cover 1 with Stephon Gilmore like we could when he was 27, 29 years old. They had to adjust to playing off-zone cover 3 and couldn't do what they wanted to do. Reminded me a lot of that with Azareye'h Thomas. So as much as I love his tape as a press man corner, I think his jams are fantastic. He's got great length. He can disrupt you at the line of scrimmage. He's got quicker feet than you expect for a guy his size. So he doesn't just stick you with his jams, but he can stay in front of you and cut off your release. He's got enough hip fluidity and foot speed to do press bail, so he can really vary his releases as a press corner. And that foot speed shows up. His processing ability shows up in terms of mirroring routes. I think if he's covering anything in a 15 to 20 yard area, he is a sticky man corner. And that's the tape that you want to bet on when you watch him and why he's got this top 50 hype. But not to beat a dead horse, man, but you are going to be constantly terrified of him getting torched over the top. And it just adds a risk profile to me attributed to his skill set that just really scares me in that way. So ultimately, I think we talked about this a little bit with the Rasul Douglas comp. I think at 20 years old, when you draft Azareye'h Thomas, realistically what you're hoping is that, okay, he is young, he is a good football player, he can figure out a different way to play and be more of an off-zone corner, which that's also where teams live in the NFL right now, is that cover 4, cover 3, top down, don't get beat over the top type of defense. I think he can do it, but he didn't do it at Florida State, and there's just other guys that we're going to talk about here today that I think are more fluid athletes out in space, faster athletes to come downhill and cut off the underneath stuff, and just better players to do that type of stuff. Naturally, Thomas gets pushed down the board if you're projecting a skill set like that as opposed to drafting him to do what he does so well. And that, again, is where the Rasul Douglas comp comes in. Someone that was a third-round pick as this smashing, slow corner that the league figured out dang, we can't really run press man coverage with Rasul Douglas. 5 years later, he finds himself in off-zone systems, becomes a pretty good player, but even then, not a great player, right? So that's more of the projection I see for Thomas, is it could take a few years before he's a starting caliber player. Maybe it clicks sooner than you think, and that's possible. That'd be great if it does, but I'm not drafting him quite as high as people are projecting him right now, with more of that hope that he can get better and show that he can do the off-zone stuff. Ultimately, he's a fun player. I hope I'm overthinking it, but this was a big concern that I needed to spend a good amount of time talking about, because obviously this is a guy I'm a good bit lower on, and I needed to kind of justify that, right? Because this guy's got a lot of hype right now, and I just can't match it. But let's go ahead and move forward to my number 10/10A corner. The same grade here as I had on Azareye'h Thomas, as a 3rd to a 4th round guy and a potential starter in the league. And that's Dorian Strong out of Virginia Tech. Really enjoyed watching him. Just steady Eddie, man. A 5-year starter at Virginia Tech. Ended up playing 5 years because his junior season was cut short for a season-ending injury, and he bounced back and continued to play well the last 2 years. So a ton of experience and just hyper consistent throughout his time at Virginia Tech. So impressive for a corner to not really have like a crazy down year. It's such a volatile position, and he didn't really have that volatility because his game is just so consistent across the board, whatever you want to ask him to do. And I'll talk about the tape and all the different stuff you can do with him that lead to that consistency, but the metrics really back this up, man. He had a career reception percentage allowed of just 45.5%. Again, on his career, that is remarkable consistency of a good number there. I mean, anytime you're under 60%, you're doing a damn good job. So 45.5% reception percentage allowed, really good. And the only year he was below 50% was, or above 50% rather, was his true freshman year, and it was at 55%, which again is still pretty good. So just really consistent, kind of hard to say shutdown coverage, but just really stable, sticky, consistent coverage. I'll put it that way. And I think the reason he's able to do that is because he's just at least above average to good across the board. Like, he's got the length, he's got okay speed, he's a really smart zone corner. The 5 years of experience shows, but even going back to his earlier years, I think he showed the ability to read quarterbacks' eyes, communicate zones, take stuff away, navigate his way into passing windows, all that good stuff in zone. But I think his man-to-man stuff is pretty damn good too. I think for a longer corner, he's got quicker feet than you expect. And there's a bit of a trade-off there because he is 185 pounds, so he's a little bit on the lighter side for his length profile. But he's not, painfully undersized. He still has some decent play strength to him. And because he's a little bit lighter, it allows him to have quicker feet to mirror routes man-to-man, stay tight on the trail, ride your hip pocket. I think that also makes him pretty fluid out in space as well for the top-down, off-zone stuff where he's got great anticipation. He can trigger downhill. He can squeeze routes really well. Which, by the way, I wanted to describe to you what route squeeze is. It's not a super common term, so you might see that and say, what the hell is that? We should probably address that sooner rather than later here. So let's just do a little sidebar there. So route squeeze for me, the way I evaluate it is really focusing on those off-zone situations for corners. And in many of these corners cases, that's the world they live in. 90% of the time, they're playing top-down, quarters, cover three, that type of stuff. And route squeeze, the way I evaluate it is, and I like to grab a rubber band and kind of make this analogy, but when you're playing off zone, you're going to start with that space, right? Or I can hold it this way to paint that picture even more clearly. but it's the corner's job to quickly react to the receiver's route break and squeeze that space back close as quickly as possible. And there's two key traits that you need to do that. You need anticipation of what the receiver's potentially going to run, which takes film study and just the ability to kind of process information, whether you're reading their hips or their feet. There's a mental side to squeezing routes that's really important. And then there's a physical side of it too. You maybe have heard the term click and close. So do you have the foot speed, the acceleration, and the change of direction to flip your hips and squeeze that space in a hurry? All at the same time, not being over-aggressive in doing so. Some guys can consistently squeeze that space in a hurry, but I end up dinging their grade for route squeeze because they're actually over-aggressive on it, and you see them getting burned on double moves, which is a huge no-no, obviously, if you're playing a lot of top-down cover 4, cover 3 type of stuff. You can't just take the cheese all the time and sprint after the first thing you see. You gotta be, technically and mentally prepared for the double moves too. So that's route squeeze. I hope you were able to follow that. But in Dorian Strong's case, I think he has solid athletic ability and very good processing and anticipation so that you can play him off and he'll actually take away some of those underneath routes, the out routes and dig routes. He will collapse on those things from off zone coverage and take it away. So he's got that. He's got the zone. He's got man. He can absolutely do press man coverage, which I like about him a lot. Uses his length well. He's a good run defender as well. Not a special run defender. Like I said, he's a little bit more slender. So in terms of having the play strength to get off blocks, and as a tackler, he's willing. He's got the length to wrap up. But if he meets a tight end or a power back or a big quarterback, they can power through his tackles, either fight for tough yardage or break his tackles at times. But really a complete player, in my opinion. I think as a, third to an early fourth round pick, worst case scenario, you're getting a guy that you can plug in as your CB4 immediately. And if you have an injury to either of your outside starters, you can throw Dorian Strong in there in his rookie season. And I think he can hold up okay. Of course, the best athletes in the NFL are going to be able to pull away from him and out-athlete him at times. So he's never going to be this shutdown guy. But I do think there are shades of a good starter in the league. And I struggled to find the right comp. I wrote down Tyson Campbell because I think his physical tools are pretty close to what Tyson Campbell has to work with. That's pretty high praise. Campbell's even like a low-end number 1, so it's not ideal. But I think of the Christian Benfords and Jalen Johnsons, maybe like a Christian Fulton, these just good corners that don't go in the first round because of, the lack of speed and high-end traits, but just really understand the position, can do a little bit of everything, and be good starters in the league. So I don't know, maybe Christian Benford would make a little bit more sense. Benford's a little bit bigger, but you guys are smart. You get what I'm saying. It's not likely that he's as good of a player as a Benford or a Campbell, but I think he showed enough that it's at least possible. So I liked him, late day 2, early day 3 for sure. But let's go ahead to my number 9 corner here, Jacob Parrish out of Kansas State. I would describe him as a quick, fast, and frisky corner with inside-outside flexibility. He's a really nice player, and really you could make the argument that he just might be the stickiest man-to-man corner in the draft, at least in terms of like proven tape versus projecting you to be a highly sticky man-to-man corner at the next level. Because some of the guys we're yet to talk about have the traits to be like really high-end man-to-man corners in the league, but maybe played a little bit more zone, or they're not quite there in their technique in a way that Jacob Parrish was at Kansas State. So at 5'10", 191 pounds, so he's kind of shorter but stockier. He's got solid strength to him at 5'10", but he's got really impressive, almost 31-inch arms. Is solid length for the position overall, but really good length relative to his size. So he kind of gets that natural leverage as a corner. So that makes him kind of an annoying, nasty press man corner. He'll get up and under your pads, really can kind of launch into you and knock you off your release right away. But he's got the quickness to turn and run with you after that press jam. And he definitely has the foot quickness and route mirroring ability to stick in your hip pocket. And he uses his length, in those kind of frisky, subtle ways to disturb your route as well. So as a man-to-man corner, he's really nice. And he's got the long speed as well to hang with you. He ran a 4.35. So that alone is a trait that you really like to applying to the NFL level and is a good trait to bet on. Now, it's not all perfect man-to-man. I think some of his press reps, he overextends. He's a really aggressive press man corner to the point that he actually would jump off sides because he was trying to get on top of guys so quickly. So sometimes he can overextend and get beat straight up. And then the other thing is, while he's got the speed and the foot speed, the quickness, the agility, I think he struggled to kind of throttle down, change directions. If he was on the trail and a guy would run a hitch or run a comebacker, he did really struggle to match that break and, stop, turn around, and close that space off. So there, it's not all perfect man-to-man and in-press man, but a lot to like there. The main concern on Parrish is the zone stuff. He's just not there yet. He ran a lot of press man at Kansas State, and when they did run zone, I just saw a guy that didn't fully know what he was doing. There's good reps in there, but a lot of times receivers are kind of, creating that leverage behind him. He's not really feeling out the routes behind him. Some busted coverages in there as well, where he's, collapsing on one guy, vacating space in another area. So it's not a huge surprise. He's just a third-year player. He's 21 years old and hasn't done a ton of zone, but, depending on where he lands, and even regardless of where he lands, the NFL, even the most man-heavy teams are running man coverage 45% of the time. So he's just got to get better at zone if he's going to be a more consistent player in the league. But I would rather teach a guy zone than have to teach him man. So there's that. I also think, too, thinking back to the kind of off-zone route squeeze type of stuff, a lot of concerning moments there. I did not think he anticipated routes well. Limited looks at him as an off-zone type of corner. But if guys wanted to run quick outs and digs and hitch routes, he didn't really close that space and take that type of stuff away. So that applies to the zone, both of those together. He's just got to learn how to defend that stuff a lot better. But love the man stuff, and I love the run defense too, frankly. There's not a lot of great run defenders in this group. I think he can definitely, I'm not going to say he's a great run defender, but he can certainly hold up. He's got the play strength for it. He's frisky, great tackler. I think he can do a better job kind of taking on blocks, getting off blocks. And for that reason, and because he's kind of this quick, frisky, bump and run cover guy, I actually think he has a ton of upside as more of a slot corner, to the point that I wouldn't be surprised if 3 years from now Jacob Parrish was one of the better slot corners in the league. The problem with that is it's more of a projection. He hardly ever played in the slot at Kansas State, so there's just a lot to learn. It's almost an entirely different position in many ways, so it could take some time to get there. But I think he can play outside too. So the pro comps I went with him, number one is Trey Brown, who coming out of the Big 12, back when Oklahoma was the Big 12, Trey Brown was very similar fast, in-your-face press man corner that needed to work on everything else and has had a hard time learning the rest of the stuff in the league, where he's been like an okay player. But because he's got the press man bump and run ability, he's at least been a useful corner in the league. So that's why I went with the low-end comp on Trey Brown, who still might be starting for the Niners this year. They signed him after his time in Seattle. But on the high end, I think Emmanuel Mosley as kind of a more undersized outside corner who had some really good years before injuries really derailed his career. And then if he makes that slot conversion, I see a lot of Michael Carter, who's a top 5 to 10 slot corner in the league with a lot of speed and feistiness for the Jets. So I do like Jacob Parrish quite a bit as a true third-round player. He's not a bona fide starter or anything like that because of the lack of zone stuff. But I think you can develop it, and if it does, could be getting a pretty damn good player here in round 3. But let's have some fun with my number 8 corner here, Darian Porter out of Iowa State. And it's frankly a pretty short conversation on Darian Porter. It just comes down to what's your tolerance for risk. But dude, the traits on Darian Porter are just insane. And when Porter did play, which was like hardly at all, I think he played about 500 snaps in his 6-year career at Iowa State, because he started as a wide receiver, and then the last 3 years he was battling to get on the field after making the conversion to corner in 2022. So there's some explanation for it, but not a full explanation for why it took so long. But the fun thing about Porter is when he played, he was just straight up dominant on his 203 coverage snaps in 2024. Which is the majority of the coverage snaps that he's played in his career, because he wasn't even a full-time starter. He was rotating as a starter. But in those 204 coverage snaps, he allowed just 5 receptions on 17 targets for 70 yards, and he actually defended just as many passes as he allowed with 5. He also showed a just ridiculous interception where he shows off the height, the leaping ability, the former receiver, the ball skills are really fun. But in an extremely, not just limited sample size in terms of snaps, but when he got out there, it was, for the vast majority of the time, it was like, yep, just go play outside corner and we want you to just run with this guy. The role that they asked of him was extremely limited. So he is absolutely raw in terms of what he has proven that he can do. But the speed is insane, 4.3 speed, but it's not just that. He has actual fluid hips, change of direction skills, stop-start ability, foot speed that you just don't find in 6'3" corners. And who he reminds me a ton of is someone that I really pounded the table for in the 2022 draft, the year Porter switched to corner, in Zion McCollum. I had a 2nd-round grade on him. He ends up falling to the 5th round of the draft. Took a couple years for him to make that switch, jumping up from Sam Houston State, but he's turned into a star corner a couple years down the road for the Bucs. I think essentially identical to Zion McCollum. I think I liked McCollum a little bit better because he had just played a little bit more at the position. He had done more stuff at the position, but in terms of the upside and the traits worth betting on, and when he did play, he was damn good. Well worth to me the risk of the upside kind of later 2nd round for me. And that's really all there is to break down on him. I mean, seriously, the press man ISO reps on the outside were really good, but beyond that, entirely unproven and unexperienced. So it just comes down to your tolerance for risk and how you kind of break down the profile here. But that's where I landed on Darian Porter, and I think he's a ton of fun. So hopefully he gets good coaching and ends up coming in near his upside at some point in the league. But I think we're good to move on, actually, to another big surprise on this list. I kind of got two hot takes with this corner class. We already did one with Azareye'h, and now my other hot take, I have Jahdae Barron out of Texas as my number 7 corner in this draft class with a second-round grade. And that's obviously unpopular. This is a heavily hyped up player. Some people have him as a top 10 player in this draft class. And obviously, I couldn't quite get there with Jahdae Barron. So let's break it down. I think the thing he gets really praised for that leads to these kind of top 10 to 15 player in the class rankings on him is the versatility on top of kind of how quick twitch and athletic he is. Basically, I've seen a lot of like Trent McDuffie comps with Jahdae Barron, and I loved Trent McDuffie. I did. Thought he was one of the steals of the draft, slam dunk pick. I didn't see that same type of player with Barron. The key difference there, and the key reason I'm lower on Barron here: lack of agility, foot speed, and stiffer hips, lack of change of direction. And he's praised for his outside corner ability. I thought as an outside corner, he's a 3rd to a 4th round prospect. I did. Really across the board, I think his top-down zone coverage ability, which he ran a ton of it in Texas's system, I was really underwhelmed, man. I think he's a smart player. I think he processes things. But like I said, the slower feet and the stiffer hips to click and close and cut stuff off underneath, I was surprised kind of how average / inadequate he was. Like, he just didn't do enough to take those types of throws away. I thought he had kind of an extra hitch in his step when he would trigger on an out route or a dig underneath. He just couldn't get there in time in a way that someone like Trent McDuffie can. It's not easy to do that as an off-zone corner, but I don't think he's got that. And then I also thought his technique was really not great, and he really looks to kind of catch guys in that 10-yard area. He kind of tries to square you up, catch you, get your hands on you, and then kind of convert it into man coverage. The problem with that is guys would, he would stop his feet and he would let guys cross his face on post routes. And even if he has good speed, I like his speed. He ran a 4.39. I think that shows. But guys would cross his face and burn past him deep. So as an off-zone corner, which he's going to theoretically do a lot of in the league, or a lot of these role projections have him doing that, I worry that he takes stuff away underneath and that he gets beat over the top. And then as a man corner, I think he's better in man than he is in zone. But even there, because he's got slower feet than you expect for a guy in his profile, he doesn't trust his feet in his technique, and he gets really, really grabby at the top of receivers' routes, and he's going to get flagged for it a lot more in the league. So I think he can run man, but he's going to get flagged more for it, and he's over-dependent on grabbing guys with short arms. He's got 29.5-inch arms, so it looks a little bit uglier. It's not as subtle as some of these longer guys that can just kind of float their arm out there. He's a little more overextended, so I did like the man coverage stuff. I think he's got the speed and decent quickness to do it, and certainly, tough to kind of press you at the line and be physical throughout the route. So I don't want to just dunk on him. I especially think the man stuff is okay. And I don't want to just paint this picture that he's a terrible zone corner either. He does make plays. He does bait quarterbacks. He does have an understanding of route combinations. He does some good stuff in zone, out in space where he's really reading the quarterback's eyes and has good instincts to make plays and stuff. So again, he's not useless as a zone corner. I want to make that clear as well. There's just aspects of playing zone coverage that I think he really struggled at. And that was really as it relates to the route squeeze and a lot of that top-down stuff. But I think what you get, what I'm putting down here, like I don't think he's a very good outside corner. I think he can do it in an emergency and be okay. I'm not drafting him in the first round to play outside corner for me. I think there's much better options in this draft. Second round, and you've got a slot guy and you like Jahdae Barron the most, we can start to have that conversation there for me. So for me, I do think he's a slot, which he played, in his fourth year at Texas. I also think he'd be a hell of a good safety. If you could just come out and say, Jahdae Barron says, I'm cool playing safety, I might even rank him a little bit higher. Because I actually think that might be his best position with the way he defends the run, the way he hits, his kind of instincts in zone in more of a safety type of way than an outside corner playing cover 4 type of way. I really like that for him if you could make that transition. But I do see realistically a slot corner, and it's not that slot corners aren't important. It's just we know they don't get paid as much. They're easier to find. And I don't think you have to spend a first round pick on a slot corner that I also, by the way, don't think is Brian Branch. I think Brian Branch was incredible in terms of lateral agility and sticky coverage skills. I think Brian Branch fell in the draft. He had a first round grade, obviously shouldn't have gone in the second round. Barron to me is much more of your typical kind of second round best slot corner in the draft type, which is a good player. I like him a lot in that role, obviously. But I just don't think you draft that where a lot of people are projecting him to go. So that's where I came in on Barron. Another guy that I realize I saw him differently than consensus. I recognize I could very well be wrong, kind of going against the grain there, but it is just kind of what I saw and where I had Barron. I'm very curious your guys' thoughts on that, but let's move on to my number 6/5B corner. I've got another tie in terms of the grade here with 6 and 5, although they're very different conversations. The grade just happened to come out the same. But I've got Maxwell Hairston here out of Kentucky at this spot. And he's not a horribly different conversation than to what we had with Porter at number 8. In that, there's still a lot to prove. There's a lot of rawness to his profile, but just a freaky athlete with ball skills, and was really damn good in what Kentucky asked him to do. So at Kentucky, they played a ton of off-zone stuff, as you see in a lot of these SEC teams. So we got a pretty good look at how he plays cover 3, how he plays cover 4, how he moves in space, how he can anticipate and squeeze routes. But we really didn't get a look at something you're hoping is also a part of his game, being the press man ability, because he's 5'11", 183 pounds. He's got good arm length, especially. So I think he could be a guy that can play press man and play off zone, which is obviously, if you can do both those things, you're in a pretty damn good spot, especially when you run a 4.28. But when you're doing what Kentucky asked him to do, which is basically play as an extension of your safety staff, where you're playing 12 yards off, don't get beat over the top, and try to be a playmaker underneath, you got to do a lot of projection. And that's just naturally going to make filling out, how good you feel about him day one. It just adds a lot of fog of war on what all he can do and how good he's going to be. So don't mean to oversimplify it. It's just that was kind of my takeaway watching him. But I do think in what they asked him to do, he handled it really well. Not necessarily to perfection, but I think the zone IQ, the eye balance from zone is pretty damn good. He can bait quarterbacks. I think he shows a decent understanding of, opposing route combinations and what offenses are trying to do to him. He'll kind of high-low you from cover 4 and try to bait throws. And that's where you see some really exciting plays from him. He's got good ball skills. He's a huge threat to not just pick you off with good hands and playmaking instincts, but if he does intercept it, he's a freaky athlete. He had, 3 pick sixes in a couple of years? Like, he is a legitimate threat to outrun your entire offense and change an entire game. So you love that about him. I do think, too, playing so much quarters, he showed pretty good anticipation of out routes and underneath stuff, and he would, he can really jump that stuff and do some of the stuff I've questioned if someone like Jahdae Barron or something we didn't see from Parrish, like he can really take away an out route or a dig route underneath when you're playing him from 12 yards off, because I think he anticipates things pretty well, and he does have just insane click and close ability, and the burst downhill plus the closing speed, oily hips, the change of direction, the agility to be ready to pounce on stuff. It's all there. So he can actually take stuff away from off zone, which not a ton of corners can do. And he's not overly aggressive with it either. I think he could be even more aggressive even because he has such great recovery speed, but you don't really see him, triggering too soon and getting, left susceptible to double moves too. So really a lot to like, again, in what they asked him to do. Even occasionally they would have him come up and play press bail from like cover 3. Very seldom, if at all, we saw him actually jam and stick his hands on guys as a press man corner. So that was an area I just left incomplete. I think he can do it, but why grade it if we just didn't see it? And I did 3 games on him. I don't recall seeing a single press jam rep from him. If they did put him in press, which was not very often, it was press bail, where he was just opening up, and he can absolutely do that. I think there's stuff to clean up with his footwork in those situations because, again, they just didn't run a lot of it. But, yeah, man, checked a lot of boxes. I would like to see him defend the run with a little bit more physicality and keep his head up as a tackler a little bit better. They got some concerns there, but overall, it's more of like, what else can he do as opposed to what he can't do, if that makes sense. And if he gets to the league and it turns out, well, he can run press man coverage and he does have good reaction time and physicality throughout the route to be a better man corner than what he got to show in Kentucky, I wrote down Diet Jair Alexander. The size profile is pretty damn similar. I think the speed and the elite athleticism is comparable. In fact, his long speed's even better, but that's the type of like physical profile you're talking about with him. That's obviously pretty rare air, but if you're talking about betting on the traits and, someone that was pretty good in a limited role, a lot to like with this guy. So I ended up with him inside my top 50. So if you're back into the first round and you want to roll the dice on him, that's kind of where I'm like, that's the difference between a second round grade and a top 50 grade, is like, if you want to sneak him into the end of the first because of the upside or whatever, like, okay, we'll see where it goes. So that's where I ended up on Hairston. And then with our next player here, very just completely different conversation, a totally different prospect. I think I could be convinced into leaning towards Hairston here, but it's just tough because with Benjamin Morrison, who again, same grade, top 50 grade, but it's just tough because we don't have the inside information on this hip injury, and he's a really tough one because what do you do with a prospect at corner here whose best trait are his oily hips and his oily movements in and out of his transitions, yet his biggest issue is a hip injury? What do you do with that? It's really tough. So the best I can really do is evaluate his tape and hope he gets back healthy and kind of apply the ding for some medical concerns, right? So it's really tough. I do think if you could guarantee me the hip is good to go and he's going to get back to the best version of what we saw from him at Notre Dame, he would be at least CB4 for me. So that's kind of why he's got the nod over Hairston is if you could remove the injury risk, he would be above Hairston, but you could argue with the injury risk, he should be below Hairston as CB6/5B or whatever. But, it's all tomatoes. Anyway, but all I can really do is talk about what we saw on the field and hope he gets back. So what did we see here? I think he showed at Notre Dame as an early breakout player, as a true freshman at Notre Dame, that he can really do everything at a high level. He just needs to do everything a little bit more consistently. So he's got the length. He's 6 foot, 193 pounds. Good, not great, but good size. That's kind of the sweet spot for a lot of number one corners in the league, is right there. Like 6 foot, 190 to 195 is like a really nice place to be size-wise. Solid length. Arms could be a little bit longer, but 30.5 inches is totally solid. The long speed I think is good. I think it doesn't really hurt him. I think he's got recovery speed. I don't know that he would come out and run in the 4.3s, but I'd be pretty surprised if it was anything outside of the 4.4s. So I ended up giving him B grade for speed. I'd expect he would probably run like 4.45 is kind of what I estimated him at. But again, before the hip, his ability to turn, whether it's press bail or he's playing top-down zone and he's clicking and closing, he's turning on a out route or a dig route, just the most lucid, oiliest of hips that you could find. And that's why I went with Greg Newsome as my pro comp. Can debate where Newsome's at in his career and where he's headed and all that, but a late first round type of guy who was drafted, very similar size profile for just the oily transitions. That's what really stands out to me about Benjamin Morrison. And he pairs it with quick feet too, but just the change of direction skills were really special on film, in my opinion. And again, with all those traits, I think you can just ask him to do everything, and he at least flashed the ability to do everything at a high level. I mentioned the top-down zone stuff. When he anticipated routes and he saw it, the route squeeze, the ability to cut some of that stuff off was special. I think a lot of the other zone stuff was pretty good. Cover 2, doing the high-low stuff, reading the quarterback's eyes, showing some good ball skills and ability to bait the quarterback. There were some good flashes there. Some bad moments, some busted coverages, some moments where I wanted to see him kind of have more active eyes and be a more active zone defender. So a little more up and down in zone at times, but a lot of good flashes. I think man-to-man, whether he was doing press jam or press bail, like I said, the press bail stuff, as long as the hip's good to go, easy ability to open up, turn, and run from press bail. That's like the best thing he does probably. So very useful there, but the quick feet, the easy transitions. I think there were some reps where he would get on the trail, stay in a guy's hip pocket, and mirror route breaks with ease. Other reps, he was just a little bit more lackluster in terms of responding to the receiver's break. Like, he would be right at a guy's hip pocket, he would cut on the skinny post or the corner route, and he would just react a little bit slower and not be as sticky in coverage. So a little bit more up and down in man. And then even some of the run defense, he just ran a little bit hot and cold. Sometimes his play strength, a little bit lackluster. The tackling certainly needs to be better. Some good moments as a tackler, but a lot of bad ones as well. So, like, young player, kind of lost his last season for the most part with the hip injury. need to see the consistency in his overall game come up. But if it does, you know, you're talking kind of like a Darius Slay, maybe even some shades of like Quinyon Mitchell at times. Maybe not quite as fast as Quinyon Mitchell, but I'm just thinking of these like super fluid movers that are complete number one corners. Like, I think Morrison could be that. And Newsome, the pro comp, like, it's trending towards him not hitting that. I think Newsome's a good comp because Newsome's had a lot of those inconsistencies throughout his time in Cleveland too. So that's where I landed on Benjamin Morrison. It's just, can the hip be healthy? Because if you could guarantee me full health with the hip, first round prospect in my opinion, and that gives him some sleeper potential, but obviously a lot of risk as well. But with that risk on Morrison, I did end up with Trey Amos as my number 4 corner out of Ole Miss. I loved his tape, man. Really a pleasant surprise. The first thing I wrote on him in the draft guide, which again, shameless plug, patreon.com/thatfranchiseguy if you want all of my player write-ups. We got 20 total corners done right now. Getting close to about 150 total players written up at this point. So you can get all my rankings, all my grades, you know, you name it. Similar information to what you're seeing on the screen right now for every player that I've watched. That is all on Patreon. But anyway, the first thing I wrote on Trey Amos in the draft guide is what I consider his superpower as a corner and the defining reason why I liked him so much. Elite combination of anticipation and processing ability gives him better route squeeze than he should have with his movement skills. So you think back to those top-down, cover 4, cover 3, off-zone moments where you're talking about having that space between him and the receiver to start. How quickly can he bridge that space? And most bigger corners aren't going to be as physically capable of doing that, right? They're going to be stiffer in the hips. They're going to accelerate slower. They might not have the closing speed or the foot speed to click and close like that. It's a big reason why I'm a little bit more hesitant on Azareye'h Thomas making a transition to doing this more often. The fact that Amos can do it at such a special level for a lengthier corner that's also good at other stuff that I'm going to talk about. But his off-zone tape was incredible. And I think the two things there, anticipation and processing, being kind of different traits for a corner. So I think the way he anticipates route breaks is special. I think he clearly does his film study. I feel like he's just got really good vision. So whether he's got his eyes on the quarterback, but in the side of his eye, he's, you know, seeing what the receiver's doing as well. He's able to put information together really well and anticipate what's about to happen. He understands tendencies and what teams are trying to do to attack him. And he just anticipates out routes, digs, hitch routes, underneath stuff. Like, he can anticipate it and trigger really, really well on that stuff. And then on top of that, the processing, which we don't talk enough about true processing ability for corners in the way that we do talk about with like quarterbacks. You know, think about the S2 test. We talk about all that, you know, all the time with quarterbacks. I would love if we gave cornerbacks the S2 test. And what that is, my understanding at least, is they put on like a VR mask. They give you a controller with like 4 different shapes, and they just throw shapes at you quickly, and you have to basically process what you're seeing. It's just trying to compute how quickly you can see something, send that information to the right spot in your brain, and then relay that back to your body. Really important trait for corners in many regards. But with Amos, I shared a clip on Twitter about this, but how quickly he's able to mirror footwork and mirror route breaks from receivers and communicate what he's seeing to his body, his response time or processing, whichever way you want to call it, reaction time, is brilliant. But the clip I shared, it's a nothing play. The play's away from Amos, but you can just see like the way he's just mirroring his footwork with the receiver in front of him. It's rare. It's like a broken Madden animation where they're doing the same movements at the same time. It's just unique with Amos, and that was just something that to me stood out as a superpower for him that led to such a productive final season at Ole Miss. 13 passes defended, reception percentage allowed of 51.6%, and that's playing a lot of top-down zone. That's a remarkable number, and he was good in previous years too. He was good at Alabama for a year. He was at UL Lafayette for 3 years. So he's been around. He's been through the journey. Clearly has developed, the mental side of the game. It just shows snap in, snap out with him. But it's not just the top-down zone stuff that he can do. He can absolutely play press man. I think his reps as a press man corner reminded me a lot of like Shavarius Ward, where he's physical. He can turn upfield. He can kind of ride the saddle and get vertical. And that's where the 4.43 speed comes in handy. You can play him as a cover one press man corner and trust that he's not going to get beat over the top. I don't think he's an elite man corner because I think he's got heavier feet, which can hurt him at times. I think it can hurt him in his press because there are times where if he's got a false step, he can't quickly recover with his feet. And just kind of, he's got the processing ability to mirror route breaks down the field, but sometimes he's just a little bit too heavy-footed to match, physically speaking, some of the quicker cuts of the quicker receivers that he's going to have to cover. So I don't think he's a great man corner, but he can do it pretty well. And then I think he can do a lot of the other zone stuff too that isn't just top-down cover 3, cover 4 like we talked about. I think as a cover 2 corner, he's really good. He can press you to the sideline, really a heady player as we've described to do the, he can high-low you from a flat zone. You can do some kind of press cover 3, Seattle 3 type of stuff with him. Really just a complete skill set. I think his ceiling is a little bit better than he gets credit for. I compare him to James Bradberry, who obviously had a really good 10-year career in the league. There were a couple years where he was a number 1 guy, spent a lot of time as a good number 2 guy in Philadelphia, but just a big physical corner that could do a little bit of everything. I see a ton of that in Trey Amos, and he defends the run. Like, I just really liked Trey Amos, and I'm very comfortable with him as CB4 ahead of Morrison and Hairston, who probably do have better physical traits and upside, but I'm more comfortable with the floor on Amos relative, of course, to the injury on Morrison, which hurts his floor, and the tape on Hairston that we talked about. But let's go ahead and move to my number 3 corner in Savone Revel. Now, he's a guy whose upside I did have to rank above someone like Trey Amos. Really a fun player, super high upside. Doesn't come without his risk, but the more I thought about Revel, it's just a lot worth betting on here that I'm willing to bet on first, second round as my CB3. The combination of size, speed, production when he was able to play, it just doesn't come around too often. 6'2", 195 pounds, good arm length, 31.25 inches, really high-end plays on tape with some of the ball skills and just elite plays that he had at the cornerback position. Really exciting stuff. But at the same time, certainly a projection in really 4 key ways. So, number 1, he just hasn't played a ton. He's played 880 snaps at ECU. He played at community college before that. You could actually make that a 5th reason. Kind of begs the question of, like, why was a athlete this freaky playing community college and ECU, and it took him 5 years to get here. I'm willing to overlook that and not put too much stock into it, but it is at least a footnote on this whole thing. But so again, number one, he hasn't played a lot of snaps, 880 snaps at ECU, of course. Tears his ACL in the third week of his third season at ECU, missed a big opportunity to kind of plant his flag this season and get a lot more of that playing time. Number two reason he's a risk is the system he played in was elementary. They had him playing just a ton of cover three, off zone, basically an extension of the safety staff, 12 yards off the ball, and just try to ball hawk as a outside third. That's basically the majority of his snaps at ECU. So the system he played in limited what all we got to see from him. Number three, of course, is the level of competition. Playing community college and ECU, making that transition is a factor in terms of risk on the profile. And then number four, he's coming off of the ACL injury, which I'm less worried about the recovery and will he be available. It's more that, frankly, we didn't get to see Senior Bowl showing to answer our number three concern on him being the level of competition. And we didn't get to see testing, which I do think matters at this position. It just would have been a little extra nice to see him come out and run a 4.32 as opposed to just assuming he can do it, right? So that's the bigger concern for me on the ACL, and then potentially like durability down the road. Sometimes guys' bodies like overcompensate to stuff like that. But in terms of recovering from an ACL that was suffered late September, I think he'll be okay. So that's less of a worry. But there's just a lot of kind of alarms with him. But his tape is like kind of incredible, man. I think his zone IQ and what they asked him to do was pretty good. I think he sees route combinations developing. He's got really good instincts to, kind of anticipate stuff, break on balls. He has incredible range and recovery speed, even when he's wrong. And just kind of a overall impressive see ball, get ball mentality as an, zone corner, playing with his eyes on the quarterback. Just the tape just passed the eye test in that way, in a way that sometimes it doesn't, not always easy to put words to a guy having that zone feel, but he had it to me on tape. I do think the anticipation and the route squeeze from playing from space to cut off some of that underneath stuff could improve. That was my big knock on his zone. He would be a little bit late to react when guys would commit to running a hitch or an out route or a dig on him. Sometimes he would trigger on it and squeeze that stuff underneath. But other times he was a little bit late to react. And I do wonder as well if the system he played in had a hand in that, because it really was a weird, conservative, off-zone cover three system. I wonder if at times they were saying, hey, don't even worry if they want to run a 5-yard out route on us in this situation. So I'm willing to maybe give him a little bit of a pass on some of that stuff, but I do want to see better anticipation at a more consistent level in the pros from zone coverage. And then man-to-man, it was up and down. It's not that they would never ask him to play bump and run man coverage. There were some of those reps in there. And for me, it was just kind of give and take. I think there are the flashes are in there where he can get in your hip pocket, and when he's focused and he's dialed into your hips and your feet and paying attention to when you cut on your route, he can snap onto it. He's got that processing ability to just stick with you and be that sticky man corner. There were other times I felt like he was being lazy with it because he could at ECU, where a guy would cut in on a slant and he would be a little bit late to react because he's just a little bit more lackluster with it. And whether he's doing that intentionally because he thinks he can bait a throw and recover and undercut it, whether he's doing that intentionally or not against NFL offenses, that's something that great quarterbacks and great receivers will take advantage of if you're not staying on top of your coverage man-to-man when you're trying to mirror those routes and stay attached at the hip. So a little bit inconsistency there with the man-to-man stuff, but it's all there in flashes. We just got to put the whole package together. And if you do, he could be a really special, like, elite corner in the league. And that's where it really is a bummer we didn't get to see him play in that final year at ECU, because these are some of the things that playing time helps. And in this, last pro, season before he goes pro, was going to be an opportunity for him to show more of this as the year went on. And he missed that opportunity. He missed the opportunity to get to the Senior Bowl and, cover these NFL wide receivers and show that sticky man coverage and have kind of the Quinyon Mitchell out of Toledo pre-draft process. He's a different player, but we missed that opportunity on Ravel. So the upside is just insane. I love betting on it at the end of the first round. And if he's there in the early second, it's even better, because I think there's a different world where if the ACL injury didn't happen, he's a top 15 pick. And God, maybe even the number one corner off the board. I don't know about that, but he's exciting, man. And even if the tape and the system he played in isn't always perfect, to me there is an it factor and just kind of a eye test checked with him that I really enjoy betting on, and that's how he ended up as CB3. But let's get to the top two guys. I think I'm going to surprise some people here in having Travis Hunter actually number 2 as a corner. Now, obviously, the overall grade on Travis Hunter, factoring in what he is as a receiver and the fact that I do think he plays both ways, he is the number 1 player that we're going to be talking about on this list as an overall prospect. But strictly as a corner, I actually do have Will Johnson. Spoiler alert. Surprise, Will Johnson is in my top 10. I think you guys could have figured that out. But I think it is going to be a little bit of a surprise that I actually have Will Johnson ahead of Travis Hunter as a corner. But that's really not a slight on Travis Hunter. I just, as we'll talk about, really like Will Johnson. But, man, Travis Hunter is so unique as a corner, and his upside as a corner is the highest on this list, in my opinion. And I think that upside comes in, yes, because he's 6 foot, 188 pounds. He's got good arm length. He's obviously a great athlete. Like, there's upside in that regard, of course. But I think there's even extra upside because of just how much his wide receiver skills show up as an asset when he's playing corner. And that works vice versa, by the way. The stuff he does as a corner helps him as a wide receiver a lot of the time too. But the ball skills, like, that's the first thing you have to mention here with Travis Hunter. You will probably never, I feel pretty good saying, you will never see a corner prospect with better ball skills. Giving him an elite A+ grade, you know what, screw it. I'm going to change it to an S. I don't know that I've given an S. But, like, you're never going to see ball skills this good from a corner because he has damn near elite ball skills as a receiver. So as a corner, it's just unbelievable the way he's able to win at the catch point, the body control to moss receivers, special stuff. Like, the idea that if and when he's in position and you try to target him, it will be a constant risk that the ball is going to get intercepted. And that point alone, I'm almost questioning if I should have Travis Hunter as CB1 because it is so rare. But besides that, like I think his wide receiver skills also show up in kind of the way that he's able to bait quarterbacks. He really understands what offenses are trying to do, where they're trying to go with the ball. And he's just got a really elite feel for those kind of high-low situations, like cover two. Not going to run a lot of like curl flats necessarily. There is a world where if you wanted him to be more of like a slot playmaking corner, like I do think that would be just kind of putting him in that 10 to 15 yard curl flat area. Could do some really dangerous stuff that he didn't necessarily do as an outside corner for Colorado. But anytime he's in a zone in that area, whether it's cover 4, cover 2, eyes on the QB, feeling out routes, and trying to make a play, super, super dangerous. So those two traits are just like rare air. All that said, the reason I do have Johnson over Hunter is I do think Johnson is a stickier cover corner. So if Hunter can get up to speed with some of his technique and being a more consistent, sticky cover corner, he will end up the better overall cornerback. But some of the knocks on him in coverage, I do think from zone, as great as he is at some of the stuff we praised him, he cheats up a lot. There were a lot of reps where I felt like he wasn't respecting the opposing team's quarterback and receiver, and maybe he gets to the NFL and stops doing this. But there's a lot of times where he's literally just letting receivers run past him because he's either got his eyes underneath or just gets beat on a double move or doesn't like fully account for the fact that a team, God forbid a team actually try to target Travis Hunter deep down the field. It's obviously easier said than done, but there were times where bad college offenses that he was going against just weren't looking, and he's letting guys behind him. So NFL teams will take advantage of that more often. So that's something he's got to be aware of and clean up. That did scare me a little bit. And then I do think when he is man-to-man or if he's matched up in a zone match situation, this is where you could feel, both as a receiver within his routes and his technique as a corner, that's where his game hurts a little bit, is kind of the fine details. And his man-to-man technique is pretty sloppy. He's really just going out trying to out-athlete guys. And what ends up happening is he's a little bit sloppy with his footwork, and he's grabby. He is very, very grabby, and he's going to get penalized more in the league. But it also just like he could be a more sticky player if he learned proper foot technique and learned to trust his feet better. So that was probably an area with his coverage where I just do want to see more growth in his game. But that is obviously not to say he's a bad man coverage corner. He's a great athlete. He is. So he can just turn and run and stick with you. Because he's covering all the same routes he runs himself, he kind of understands how he's getting set up, and, shoulder fakes and head fakes and, fast feet don't really fool him all that much. So that's great. I think he's an okay press corner with room to grow there as well. That would be another differentiator between Hunter and Will Johnson, as we'll see, is, his foot technique as a press player isn't as good as Will Johnson. Sometimes he'll get a step behind, or he'll stop his feet from press bail, and he'll lose a half a step in his coverage because his footwork and his press technique just needs a little bit of work. So there's just, again, a couple areas with the coverage that need to be cleaned up, but he can run every coverage, and if he does improve his technique, can run all of them at a elite level. The only other thing on Travis Hunter is Run defense is take it or leave it, I think, with him. I think it's tough because when he wants to defend the run, if it's a critical 3rd and 1 and you run a toss his way, I think he will do it. He will tackle. He showed he can do all that stuff. Most of the time, he's pretty indifferent about the run, and I think that's actually okay. If you're going to play him at wide receiver and he wants to play 90-plus snaps in a game, I'm actually okay with him making some business decisions, especially he's a little bit slender. And a business decision for Travis Hunter is actually a very team-friendly decision because he's, with how he's built and how much he's going to play, he's opening up a larger opportunity for injury. He just is. So, do I need him throwing his head into the mud to stop a half a yard in the pile against the run? No, especially because if he gets hurt, you're not just losing a corner, you're losing a receiver. So an injury for him is like losing 2 starters. So it's like this tough balance where I actually like that he does this. But if you're evaluating him as a corner, there is stuff that other guys do that Hunter's not going to do so consistently, right? And there are some plays where, especially as a kind of a coverage run defender, if that makes sense, like say the slot corner gets beat up the seam, or let's say the slot corner misses a tackle, Hunter sometimes takes himself out of the play where he's just kind of watching it all play out, whereas another corner is going to be there to clean it up. Hunter might not take those extra, run those extra 10 yards to be there to clean it up. So it's a give and take with him that I think it's a fair conversation to have, and an interesting one, but that's where I came away with that whole conversation. But special corner. I'm almost talking myself into putting him CB1. I totally get it if you have him CB1. It's just a unique conversation with him. But I do really freaking like Will Johnson, who comes in CB1 for me. Obviously, kind of a lost, quiet 2024 season as he battled injuries. I think it was week 4 against USC. He gets a shoulder injury and then kind of tries to battle through it, and then he gets turf toe at the end of the year. So he played, 5.5 games, battling through injury. Very much a wasted year for him and for Michigan. I mean, everybody left. This reminded me a lot of Derek Stingley when he got kind of stuck at LSU. In Stingley's case, it was 2 years. But, Will Johnson, he has to witness basically everybody from his national championship team go pro, and he's got to hang out and play for a kind of bad, middling Michigan team. And I think for him, he put his body on the line, but I can fully understand, talk about business decisions, you start to get a little bit beat up, and he's not always going to play through contact or go the extra mile. And ultimately, I think he got a little bit checked out and just started thinking about his pro career. And I don't blame him for that. If you've got a different opinion about that, that's fine. But if he had just opted out and just said, I'm going to get ready for the draft, I don't think anybody would have blamed him. And we're probably talking about him as a lock top 5 pick as we were before this season happened. And it's not like with him we're talking about, he had an ACL tear or a hip injury where you're a little more worried about it. It was a shoulder injury and turf toe. Maybe maybe it's a slight ding as one of these corners that maybe has some durability questions, but it's not some major injury that I think is going to reduce his physical capabilities in any sort of way. So, I'm not worried about the 2024 season. And it's not like he was horrible either, right? Like, you still watch earlier in the year before he got hurt, Texas week 2, USC week 4, still really good tape. So I'm willing to overlook a lot of this cloudiness that has pushed him down into more of the, maybe 7 to 15 range of this draft, as opposed to the 3 to 7 range where he probably was heading into the year. Not a major fall, obviously, but it's been a minor fall. But I think when healthy, Will Johnson shows like that's what a number one corner looks like in the modern NFL, but he's doing it at Michigan. And the fact that he ran Jesse Minter's defense for 2 years. Like, he's done the Mike Macdonald defense, especially if he happens to go to one of the 5 teams, permeating the Mike Macdonald system throughout the league. Maybe Seattle can get in play to find Will Johnson, or, Miami at 13 or something like that. But if he happens to get in one of those systems, I mean, it is even more plug and play, because he's done it. He has literally done that system for 2 years. So, like, that would be even extra perfect, but that'll translate to a Fangio system that runs a lot of cover 6, cover 4, off zone stuff, or all the solid trees. Like, this is the modern meta of the NFL, and he's done it at Michigan. But it's not just, okay, the scheme, the terminology, the playbook he ran. It's his traits and his tape. Like, he has everything to be a true number one corner that can do everything in the league. And especially his zone coverage tape. It's just phenomenal, man. Especially the top-down cover 4 stuff. We've talked about route squeeze requiring both the physical ability with twitch and acceleration, change of direction to close that space from top-down coverage, but also the mental requirements of processing and anticipation. He has both of those boxes checked wholeheartedly. To play in this system his whole career and finish with a 54% reception percentage in a top-down zone system, that's insane. And his ability to actually not just take away out routes and digs and underneath stuff, but to actually get all the way there and jump it and intercept the ball. Like, he has really special traits to do, again, what the modern meta is going to ask Will Johnson to do most likely, is run top-down zone coverage at least every 3 snaps. But it's not just top-down zone. If you want to ask him to run cover 2, which that's where this whole picture comes together, because the Mike Macdonald and Jesse Minter systems, they don't just run cover 4 all the time. They run cover 6 and cover 2. And of course, half of cover 6 is cover 2. So he has to play that kind of soft squat, high-low, cover 2 role, where he's perfect as a cover 2 corner. He's got the length to press you towards the sideline, disrupt your release so you don't hit that honey hole shot right away. But he gets his head around. He can play cover 2 or the cover 2 side of cover 6 brilliantly. So any of these many 2-shell split safety style defenses, whether it's a Macdonald, Fangio, or Saleh system, perfect skill set for all those different zones. He can also do like press cover 3 stuff as well, where his zone IQ is really good to kind of read those mesh points and play those systems too. So like every single box in terms of coming into the league and playing zone right away, absolutely ready to go. Hardly needs coaching, in my opinion, as a zone corner. Now, the one drawback to him running this system is we really didn't see much man coverage from him at all. I'm comfortable enough projecting him at least as a solid man corner. The reality is we just hardly saw it at all. So press jam, getting in a guy's hip pocket. Can he stay physical throughout the route? How does he look with his back turned to the quarterback a little more often? It's just a question mark. It's not something we saw a lot from him at Michigan. And I also think the long speed You know, we're not going to get a 40-yard dash from him, or at least we don't have it yet. He might run it right before the draft. I think he's got like an April 17th pro day scheduled. So, you know, obviously it'd be great if he comes out and runs a 4.39. I think he's got probably 4.42 speed. Like, he's got plenty of speed in my opinion. But we're not going to get that 40 time. But, you know, obviously speed in man coverage is important so that guys don't pull away from you. But you don't really, I'm not really worried about the speed on him. It just might not be a defining strength of his game in the way that it is for guys maybe like Ravel or Harrison or Porter. But definitely think he can hold up man-to-man. You know, I gave it a C+/incomplete just to kind of make that statement of like, he should at least be okay as a starting point, but he might also just come into the league and turns out he's really good at man-to-man coverage as well. He just didn't get to do it at Michigan. It's one of those like, what can you do versus what were you asked to do types of things. So maybe even some more hidden potential in there if you want to look at it in a positive spin. And then, you know, he's got the playmaking feel too. I think he's got good hands, good ball skills. In the times where his back was turned, which wasn't a ton, I thought he could get his head around and, you know, play comfortable in phase down the field. That's a part of ball skills for me, is, you know, getting your head around, not panicking at the catch point. That's definitely in Will Johnson's game, so you love that. Just a super poised, you know, traitsy, smart, productive corner who went through it last year. But definitely a round one grade for me. In consideration in the top 10, I gave a Darius Slay comp to both him and Travis Hunter, because I think these guys are all similar size and super fluid athletes that maybe don't have elite top speed, that are really good instinctive zone corners, just like Darius Slay. So I was comfortable just sharing the same pro comp of Darius Slay. And that is a fun way to wrap up today's cornerback rankings. So I am getting back to the lab now, going to go watch safeties. Going to be, you know, another 3, 4, 5 days till we get that video. Going to have a fun guest mock draft coming up here tomorrow, I think, as of when you're watching this. So there is a video in between there to look forward to. But I appreciate you guys for watching. You'll have to let me know your thoughts on some of the opinions I had, especially on Jahdae Barron and Azareye'h Thomas. So you guys let me know if I'm crazy there or if maybe I'm onto something. But let me know. All the comments down below. I appreciate you guys for watching, and I will see you guys soon. Peace out.